This is the Skoda Fabia, and when I first parked it in my driveway, my housemate asked me if it was zippy. I said yes, but I'm hoping right now you'll want to know a little bit more than that about this car. So I'm going to run you through everything you might want to know about the Skoda Fabia. We'll start with its design, we'll jump in and have a look at the interior, I'll take it for a drive and let you know what that's like, and then I'll tell you whether I think it's a good buy. This particular version is the Run-Out Edition, and while that means it's at the end of its lifespan, it's hoping to sway you from buying some of its competitors, like a Kia Rio, a Suzuki Swift, or maybe even its sibling, the Volkswagen Polo. That's because underneath, that's essentially what this is. But the Fabia comes with a few fun features and for less cash. Before I dive too far into it though, hit that subscribe button if you haven't already, and you'll get 2 new Wheels review videos every week. I reckon by now most people are familiar with the way the Volkswagen family works and know that Skoda is generally the budget-friendly child. But that doesn't mean it's the runt of the litter. Generally, Skodas use a lot of the components from more expensive Volkswagens, and like I mentioned, in this case, that's the Polo. But this Fabia is not based on the current generation Polo, it's actually based on the previous one from around 7 years ago. That's not necessarily a bad thing though, especially when you consider that this Fabia cost less than $24,000, while a similarly spec'd Polo would cost you a few $1,000s more. Effectively, what 30k drive away gets you elsewhere, around 25k drive away gets you here. But before I dive too far into the specs and features, let's have a look at the exterior design. I don't think the Fabia is particularly beautiful, but I wouldn't call it ugly either. It's definitely better looking than its last generation, and I think there's enough in its design here to make someone that was on the street perhaps look at it and say, oh, what's that? I don't think white is the most exciting colour for it either, and you can get red as a basic colour option, but any premium colours cost you $550. There are a few aspects of the Runner Edition that make the Fabia look a little bit more sporty than it might otherwise. The first thing you might notice is the black surround on the grille instead of where the chrome used to be. Over here, halogen headlights that don't actually have an automatic on-off, and then underneath some LED DRLs. Down a little bit further, some fog lights kind of add a little bit more to the sporty look, give it a little bit of a European vibe, and then along the bottom, this black part of the grille kind of breaks up the shape of the car, makes it look a little bit less chunky at the front. Moving down the side of the car, and there's more to see in the Runner Edition than we had at the front. For a start, these 16-inch black alloys are part of the Runner Edition, and they look much better than silver wheels, or especially hubcaps, on some cars that you would normally see around this price point. Up here, black mirror caps are part of the Runner Edition as well, indicators on the mirrors instead of on the front 3/4 panel. We can also see up here that the roof is black. I don't know how I'd feel about that in summer with the heat, but visually it certainly gives more character to the car. Also from the side of the car here, we can see that the back door is quite wide for a small hatch, and as I'll get to later, that's actually quite useful for getting in and out of the back seats. Around the rear of the car, and it's more standard Skoda design gear. Like most manufacturers are doing at the moment, Skoda has its full name written out across the back of the boot. The taillights here are also pretty standard for Skoda, and also in terms of the overall design of the car, we can see from the back here that the Fabia is quite squared off. That means when it comes to parking, it's easy to know where the corners of the car are, but for the back here and when reversing, even though there's a reversing camera, a shape like that is quite handy. The Skoda Fabia has a 330-litre boot, which for a small hatch is really quite good. The Volkswagen Polo has 351, just a little bit more, but something like a Suzuki Swift only has around 240. Here, a lot of that space is taken up by stuff like this netting here and this little bag holder here. It's all very convenient, and it's part of this kind of thing that Skoda does where it has all these thoughtful little touches that are quite nice to live with. I'll get to some more later on in the car. While that stuff's all removable, if you need more space, you can fold the rear seats down for 1,150 litres of storage, and if that isn't enough space, for an extra $1,100, you can get the Fabia Wagon, which has 200 more litres of storage. Another handy little feature about the Fabia is that all of the windows are automatic, single press from the driver's seat controls, and if you're outside the car and you hold down the unlock button on the key fob, you can also put all of the windows down, same thing with holding the lock button to put them all back up again. Now I'm going to jump into the driver's seat and show you around the inside of the cabin. Your first impression of the Fabia interior probably won't be amazing. Sitting here in the driver's seat, at first it feels a little bit like a nice hire car, but once you start poking around, there's a lot to like in this interior. Moving past some of the plasticky materials, even this fake metal up here feels a little bit on the nose. It's actually quite a functional interior. The infotainment system, for a start, is quite small and looks a little bit outdated, but it can be used with Android Auto or Apple CarPlay, which kind of moves past all of the older functions of it. It doesn't have its own navigation system, for example. The steering wheel as well is a little bit old in terms of the controls, but to hold, it's actually quite nice. It's leather wrapped, it feels sporty, and the controls themselves are actually pretty simple and easy to use. In front of you on the dash as well, you get a couple of analog dials, which sometimes I quite enjoy, and there's quite a small screen for the driver display, which does minimize distraction, again, something that's sometimes quite nice. It's cloth seats all around in the Fabia, no leather to be seen, but the seats actually do feel quite comfortable, they're snug, they hold you in place, almost have a sporty feel to them, and even though the controls are all manual, the adjustment is quite good. Another slightly outdated looking part of the cabin are the aircon controls. It's 3 dials, even the vents all look a little bit old as well, but sometimes keeping it simple is best. Down here there's a USB port and a 12-volt socket, both pretty handy, but they do kind of sit behind where a water bottle would be if it's in one of these cup holders. But don't worry, you probably won't be able to fit a water bottle in those cup holders anyway. The cup holders are about the right size for a takeaway coffee cup, a small or a large one with the 2 different sizes, or maybe even a 600ml water bottle, but anything bigger than that will sit comfortably in this door card though. There's quite a big space for a large water bottle. Also in the door card is one of Škoda's fun little features I mentioned earlier. It's this, and even though it looks a little bit like a travel sick bag, it's actually a bin that sits in the door card. To be honest, with bass heavy music, it rattles around a little bit in there, so I actually have been driving with it sitting out of the door. But it's a thoughtful little addition that is one of those things that Škoda is kind of well known for. From here we can also get to the second fun little feature which Škoda's added to the front of the cabin. It's actually this umbrella here, which is something that a lot of Škodas have in various different places. It's pretty good for a city like Melbourne here, where it can rain at the drop of a hat. We can thank the Czech Republic for that one. A couple more little pluses that you can't see, rear cross traffic alert and blind spot detection, come with a premium pack that costs $3,200. What you do get in here though is a pretty decent reversing camera, ABS, and even adaptive cruise control. All of the nice little basic stuff you would expect to come with a car like this. Another note on safety features, the Fabia has 6 airbags, tyre pressure monitoring, and it has ESC like most cars do now. Despite the slim list of safety features, it does actually have a 5-star ANCAP rating, which it gained back in 2015. So it's not the most up-to-date rating, but it's still pretty sound. Speaking of basic, I'm going to jump in the back seat and tell you what it's like from there. Earlier on, outside the car, I mentioned that the back doors are pretty wide for a small hatch, which, as you might have seen with me getting into the car, given the positioning of the back seat, it's actually pretty handy for entry and exit. Once you're in here though, it is pretty comfortable. The rear seat, much like the fronts, kind of holds you in place without squishing you, but in terms of the features back here, it's pretty slim. There's not even a center armrest. You do, however, get this funny little storage space down here and 2 USB ports for the rear seats for charging. While it might look like a little bit of a basic and cramped space, the seat, like I mentioned, is actually pretty comfortable, and my knee room, shoulder room and headroom are all fine in a way that I think I could actually sit in here for longer than it might seem. Document holders on the back of the front seat instead of netting are quite a nice addition, and much like the front seats, there's plenty of space in the door cards for big water bottles and such. Also, if you're in family mode, there are ISOFIX points on either side of the back seat here. Now I'm going to get back in the driver's seat because we're going to go for a drive. So, a few basic specs for the Fabia. This one comes with a 7-speed DSG, or dual clutch gearbox, meaning it's the 81 TSI, 81 kilowatts and 200 Newton meters. There's a 5-speed manual base model option, which you can actually get for 22 grand to drive away at the moment, but it does mean that the car only comes with 70 kilowatts. One of the reasons you might prefer to go with the manual is that the DSG can be a little bit hesitant at low engine speeds. Pair that with a heavily turbocharged and therefore slightly laggy engine, and takeoffs in the Fabia can be a little bit slow to start. Once you are on the move though, as I said before, it's quite zippy. Okay, I actually hate calling cars zippy, so I'll say that it's playful and feels a little bit quicker than a car with 81 kilowatts has any right to. Part of that is probably down to the fact that its curb weight comes in at a touch under 1100 kilos, although 200 Newton meters definitely does help pull things along. Something else that makes the Fabia feel a little bit fun is the slightly stiffer suspension that it gets as part of the Run-Out edition. And while it means it's not going to win any awards in terms of comfort, it's probably not enough to make anyone not feel like using it as a daily runabout. The other part of that is that you're inclined to go for a drive just for the sake of it, It helps the Fabia stick through corners and feels quite lively on a windy road. If you are getting spirited, the brakes do work pretty well, especially given the lightweight of the car, and the pedal feels pretty nice. It's got a little bit of feel to it, but it's not too extreme. The steering is also quite light, but it's nicely weighted and balanced. The wheel itself also has a quite sporty feel to it, the flat bottom as well. The whole thing kind of helps you feel like you're more in control of the Fabia, and through corners, again, it is accurate and sort of does exactly what you would want it to do. If you are getting lively and you've got the gearbox in sport instead of drive, it means that the engine and the gearbox do work a little bit better together. It holds the revs in a nicer place to be able to drive out of corners a little bit more quickly than you might otherwise. Although I think having control over the gears yourself really gives you the best options in terms of controlling the car. I think this car would do really well to have paddles behind the wheels actually, because even though using the shifter isn't too bad, it does mean you have to take a hand off the wheel to shift down and then have a little bit more speed through the exit of a corner. Another thing I should mention about driving the Fabia is that the noise isolation isn't incredible, but there's not really any outside noises that bother me too much. There's not massive tyre noise. Unless it's a particularly windy day like today, you're not really going to cop a lot of wind noise either, and most people are driving with the radio or music on anyway. One of the Fabia's noises that I do enjoy though is its little 3-pot engine. Sometimes the turbo gives you a little bit of a playful whistle, sometimes the 3-pot sounds like a little bit thrummy when it's up in the top end of its rev range, and I think it kind of adds a little bit to the character, the sort of fun nature of this car. I'm not going to call it a hot hatch, but I will say that it is a compact that has some feisty nature to it. As far as driving experiences go, the Fabia can be both a pretty pleasant and playful one. There's not really much in the way of little annoyances that some cars might have where the safety systems start intervening with your driving, or even the visibility around the Fabia is quite good and there's nothing really to stop me from doing a quick shoulder check like that. And for a car that costs in the low 20s, even its adaptive cruise control is pretty well tuned. It's definitely the kind of car that makes me want to keep driving, even if I get home after a long outing. So, is the Škoda Fabia the kind of car I reckon you should spend your money on? Well, at its price point, it certainly makes an interesting value offer, but in some ways it's also a little bit of a niche car. For a start, you've kind of got to be able to get past some of the outdated interior components. Hopefully by that point you've already decided you like the exterior though. Then there's the fact that its drivetrain can be a little bit difficult to gel with in some ways, especially in a suburban or urban environment. And then there's the fact that its suspension errs on the stiffer side of things. But it does have plenty of interesting little features that I think are the sort of things that draw people to the Škoda brand. It's the thoughtful little things, like the umbrella, the door bin, or all of the netting in the boot. There's all of that, and the fact that if you're someone who likes driving, this car can be a very fun time. Also, like I mentioned earlier, the 7-year warranty is a pretty interesting offer right now, and it probably puts to rest some of the concerns that some people have about European cars and reliability, especially since it's only a little bit of extra cost over the price of the car. So, like a lot of Škodas, it's not really a mainstream offering, and it's not super premium either. But if you're the sort of person who likes to be a bit smart with their money and wants something that's not boring or something that is different, here it is. Let us know in the comments down below if you think the Škoda Fabia is your cup of tea, or start an argument with us about the car you would buy instead. Like I mentioned earlier, make sure that you hit subscribe and probably press that little bell icon next to it as well, because that means you'll get notified about 2 new Wheels review videos every single week.